12:30 on the dot. I think we'll start. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Gesine Kippenberg, Head of Professional Programs. And today we're really pleased to have with us Tomas Millar to present of Millar+Howard workshop. Many of you probably know Tomas through his work as creative director of Guerrilla Tactics last year, or some of his other speaking engagements over the years. And yeah, Tomas is, as I mentioned, co-founder of Millar+Howard workshop in Gloucestershire. And he always has been obviously very interested in the use of digital technologies also, such as virtual reality and photogrammetry. I'm not sure if I pronounce it correctly, in architecture, really to help practices connect more with their clients. So Tomas has been speaking quite a bit on that and found that really those really successful tools for his practice. I think generally what I would say about Tomas from a personal perspective is he is someone who is endlessly curious and really looks always also beyond architecture to find inspiration and insight from other sectors and other professions, and really then seeks to translate, to take the best from all worlds, really. And what I also always really admired and appreciated about Tomas is that he is so open to share what he knows and his insights with really everyone in a very generous way. And I found that was very admirable, but I could also see how that actually, I think, Tomas, also helped you get ahead. You know, you built your network also that way with that generosity and explore different business ventures. So it's really nice to see that personal quality also supports your business success. So if you want to say a little bit more about yourself, and then we go to the presentation.
Great. Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and it's really exciting to speak with everyone here today. Yeah, shall I share my presentation now? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah, we just.
What I should also say, sorry, so Tomas is obviously giving a short presentation, and you're always welcome to just comment post any comments or questions throughout in the chat, and we'll pick up on that later. And then we would also welcome you to just, you know, ask any questions or make any comments also personally to Tomas afterwards. So it's a really informal, friendly, format.
Thanks for that. And okay, I'm presuming everyone can see the presentation, the start of the presentation there. I think I kind of get really excited by these kind of events, and thanks for kind of setting this up, because I think it's really exciting to share, as Gesine was saying, with between practices and architects. It's quite interesting. Sometimes you might give a talk about the actual buildings, but I think as architects we see a lot of those buildings. I always quite like to talk about some of our processes. So today I'm actually going to talk about several things that strategies that we've adopted as a practice, which have really kind of been pivotal in sort of moving the practice on and developing how we work as architects. And then I'm also at the end going to kind of highlight some of the struggles that we have and continue to have, and haven't found solutions to yet, and I'm hoping some of those might resonate, and that we might be able to have a discussion together about how we can kind of push forward to begin to kind of solve some of those things. Yeah, so I'll get started. So this is us. We're kind of there's about 12 of us. We're based in an old industrial mill in the Stroud Valleys in Gloucestershire. Yeah, these are some of the buildings that we've done over our kind of time. It's funny looking back through the presentation. I think these are almost the only slides that show any of our work, and I do sometimes wonder if I should show a little bit more of the work along the way. But I do quite like the process too, and really refining the process that's kind of behind these buildings and really getting that right. So the first kind of thing I want to talk about, and that's been really influential to us, is this idea of taking the first steps. There's this surf video that I first started watching when I was 8, and it documents this guy called George Greenough, and he loves surfing, but he hates the crowds. And I started watching this when I was 8, and I've actually, this video, strangely it might seem, has been a real anchor in my kind of journey as a person, both kind of personally and professionally. And whenever I'm struggling with a decision, I come back to this video to kind of really help me, I suppose, be truthful about what I'm doing. And this guy's amazing. The video was made in the kind of early 70s, and he films everything with this military camera that's used to kind of analyze the path of bullets and explosions. But he's built this housing for this video camera, and he films these slow motion shots from within the from within the wave. And you know what this massive camera does is you can now achieve on a small little GoPro, but this was really innovative for its time. Anyway, how it's kind of relevant to me is there's 2 particular moments in the movie, in the documentary, and one of them's fairly early on, where he says, "One night I dreamt I went to San Miguel Island, where I was visited by some people from outer space who came in a flying saucer. The boat that I went there in was enclosed just like a car and was just as comfortable. It seemed like a good idea, so I built the coop." I think this thing, it seemed like a good idea, so I built the coop. Almost the audacity of it, that you could have a dream and the next day you could just get up and build it. Like, surely you need to train yourself first, or you need some kind of permission. And I think kind of, you know, developing from a child to teenager to an adult, I've always kind of been intrigued to come back to this idea that you could have a dream and then just act on it, and make it happen. So this has been something that I sort of come back to if I'm trying to make a decision. Later in the film, he builds a much bigger boat, and he then goes sailing around with his friends around the ocean. And he says there's lots to learn from the ocean, but we had taken the difficult step, we had begun. And again, I suppose it's this idea that there's a big world out there that is uncertain and we don't know, and there's kind of lots to discover, but that the really important thing is to take the first step. And I think I come back to this again whenever thinking about something professionally, and sort of wondering what to do next, and always reminding myself that taking that first step is often the most kind of important thing. And I suppose how that's kind of played out in my career is, after leaving university, rather than I actually failed my final year at university and went back to Gloucestershire to live with my parents while I retook. And an opportunity came up to build a tree house with an old architecture friend, and who's Tom Howard, who we now have a practice with. And so this was really the birth of our practice. And so I suppose it came out of that idea of there being a dream to build a treehouse, and why not take that kind of seriously and build something really kind of imaginative. And it's interesting, you can kind of plot the lineage of that right back to, this is a project that was kind of on Grand Designs, I think in around 2016, of a 3-bedroom passive house treehouse, which was in amongst a kind of a listed grade 2 listed garden. But really kind of continuing that spirit that started when we just left university. And it also then, this is a project that won an RIBA award several years ago, and it's a wedding venue that's built from rammed earth. So the walls are solid rammed earth that was actually dug up on the site, and then just kind of compacted together. And the walls of this kind of both absorb the heat that's produced by people dancing in the wedding, and it also acts as an acoustic barrier for the rest of the village, for the noise. Actually, there's an amazing drone footage of this that the wedding venue have just released for the kind of celebrating reopening, which, if you can, I don't know, if you Google the gilliflower drone and look on their website, they've got it. It's absolutely incredible with flying through the building. Anyway, sorry, that's a slight aside. So then, yeah, so that's kind of about some of the philosophy of how we started. And I've got a few kind of, they're almost like tips or tricks that I've been using for kind of a few years now, and I've talked about previously at Guerrilla Tactics, so I'm not going to go into great detail, but for those who might not know about it, I thought I'd just mention them. One's this technique of photogrammetry. So it's where you take a whole set of photos, in this case taken with a drone. You take lots of photos of the same thing, about 300 photos. You feed it through a piece of software. So we use Agisoft Metashape, it's called Agisoft Metashape, and it produces this point cloud, and then it produces a 3D model, which we can then bring into 3D modeling software and start to kind of put the proposals in. I've talked about this before, but I think it's really exciting because it means it takes the computer all night to produce these models, but you can just leave it running overnight, and almost the next day you can start kind of modeling proposals while you wait another month or two for the actual survey to come. And we've been finding in some cases this can be kind of millimetre accurate. The other update on this, compared with when I've previously talked about this, is there used to be quite strict drone rules, which there still are strict drone rules. However, if your drone is under 250 grams, then it's considered to be safe and you don't need a license and things. And the rules on that changed this January, and this particular drone is under the weight limit, and so makes it a lot more accessible to companies. You don't have to, previously you had to do a kind of 2-day course and pay almost £1,000 to get that license, whereas this is much easier to get you up and running. So a little tip if you're interested. And then the next thing that we kind of use quite a lot is virtual reality. It's quite interesting. When I say there's debate about it within the practice, but certainly I'm a bit of a BIM skeptic. I think it's maybe perhaps a little bit too kind of comes at things from an engineering perspective. So tends to be about numbers and things rather than spaces. I know people disagree with that, and I kind of maybe one day I'll be one round, but I think the thing that I've been more interested in thinking about kind of digital tools is I'm really interested in virtual reality and using that, and so we've been using that for about the last, I think it's about 6 years now. What I love about this is the human aspect of it, and how it puts it's the kind of almost the first form of representation where you kind of your body is taken into account in the form of representation. So if you're short, you see the building differently to if you're taller, and so you're really relating to it on the scale of your own body. And there are a couple of, if I just play this, is this going to work? We use Unreal Engine, which is a games engine for our visualizations. This here actually isn't one of our visualizations. We can't do them this good, but I thought I'd just, I've got a clip off the internet here of at the absolute top end of Unreal Engine, what it can achieve. And interestingly, they're just about to bring out Unreal Engine 5, which does so this is a real-time rendered image, so you can edit the objects and geometry in here with this level of detail of lighting. It's just been released in the last 2 weeks in its beta form, and it's due to be released later this year properly. It's a piece of free software. Again, it's quite a lot to get your head around, but if you're interested in that and kind of can pick up software relatively quickly, then Unreal Engine 5 I think is going to be a total game changer in the architectural visualization sphere. And yeah, we're really I'm a little bit nervous about how much time it might take me to learn it, but yeah, it's really exciting. I mean, I think this is the last thing. Again, I've talked about this before quite a lot, but thought I'd mention it again, is this idea of multiple service levels. So this has been really key in how the services we provide. And since we've implemented this idea, it's really radically changed our relationship with the clients. So the basic idea is if you have kind of 3 architects all quoting for a job, you might have one quoting 25,000, one quoting 35,000. And what I'd advocate is really breaking your services into kind of different, almost like a gold, silver and bronze. Because the thing about this is it really makes you focus on not only, or makes the client focus not only on the cost, but on what you're actually delivering for that cost. And as you can see in this model, you can also both undercut the kind of possibly, like you can provide a service that's potentially cheaper than the cheapest other tenderer, and also more high end than the next most high end, as it were. So you can kind of yeah, so since we've been offering this as a service, we've found it's helped us convert clients. And so this is kind of roughly how we kind of charge our fees. So we also try to kind of break that service into as many different components as we can, and then put ticks to the ones that are included in the different service levels. I've made a Google Sheets copy of this, which I think we're going to post in the chat. If anyone wants to kind of have a look at it as an example of how to charge the fees. We've spent a bit of time trying to coordinate the colours with the RIBA colours for the different stages and things. But yeah, hopefully that might be useful as a starting point if anyone's interested in kind of following a similar kind of approach. So just take a sip. So we now move on to the things that I found a little bit more kind of difficult and challenging about what we do. And these are things that I find challenging and haven't really properly found a solution to. I suppose one of the biggest of these is just the fact of being a consultant and really finding that idea a bit challenging. Open Systems Lab and Alistair Parvin, this is a slide that they've kind of produced, which I've always really loved, of showing that kind of process. And they talk about this idea of the different consultants kind of passing documents, doing revisions, costing too much, having to go back for value engineering, and that whole kind of process, which at times just doesn't feel right. And apparently the result of this is that often only, roughly half the cost actually goes into the building, and then a lot of the other costs are going into fees, overhead, risk, and things. Obviously, architects aren't responsible for all of that, but kind of the building industry is, in general, it just seems like there could be better ways of doing this. And I suppose kind of related to that are client relations and kind of relating to clients, which I think is quite kind of wrapped up in the idea of us being consultants. It's interesting, I'm part of a small practice group at the RIBA, and yesterday we had a presentation from someone that was really interesting, and they were talking about how Business Coach had been suggesting that they sort of break away from this idea of charging themselves at an hourly rate and look to more be kind of productizing their services, which I think is really interesting. I think these are some of the problems that we kind of experience that really kind of stem from quite often a lack of understanding of what an architect does. A lot of our work is, our clients are the kind of first-time clients. And getting, it takes us perhaps 7 years or longer to get our heads around what it is we do. And I think for our clients, expecting them to understand what we do and what we offer, it's a lot to expect of a client. It's interesting, our office manager, who hasn't come from an architecture background, says she had no idea the amount of work that we put into a project prior to working in our practice. She really just thought we do the planning drawings and then that's it. And so getting those client relationships right, helping explain what we do, and then these are some of the problems that we have experienced in the past of late payments, mistrust, changes in the brief, getting the right professional advice, challenging this idea of do we really need an architect, and things like that are things that we really try and work out solutions to, but they're quite complex problems to solve. And one of the questions we ask ourselves is it possible to have customers rather than clients? And so this is something that we've been really looking into since Christmas. So we identified this idea a little bit just after the Christmas break. We came together and were thinking about how we wanted to go forward in the future, and thinking, could we provide buildings as a product rather than a service? Now, it sounds like I think it's quite a big project in a way, and whether it's one we really want to take on now, I'm not sure. I've seen some interesting examples of where this is done. I lived on an island in Canada for a while, just after doing my part 1, where people built houses out of driftwood that washed up on the shore of the island. And there was one guy, he wasn't an architect, but he was a kind of designer and builder, and he had a rule with his clients, and this is one of his buildings. He's called Lloyd House, and he had a rule with his clients that he would only meet them 3 times between them first approaching him and him delivering them the final building. And he would take into account what they said, but he had no obligation to actually listen to them. Or no obligation to execute exactly what they said. So in the end, he'd make the decisions on their project. And what's amazing is his buildings have become so renowned that he has a kind of 3 or 4 year waiting list to provide his buildings to people. So it's an interesting, I'm not sure if I'd like to go that extreme or not, but I think it's really interesting that there could be these different models for how architects provide their services, and maybe breaking out of that consultant paid by the hour to something a little bit more like providing a product. And I'm really in awe of these organisations, of UBuild, WikiHouse and Facet Homes, who are all companies who I feel are trying to kind of tackle this issue and doing it with great success in a lot of places. And I really look up to these people as kind of leading the way on thinking about different ways of doing things, which I think is really exciting. And one of the ways that we're kind of exploring this a bit is we have a sister company called Lived In. This is a project that we've just is actually being built on site now, but basically the idea of Lived In is we connect landowners with people who want to build their own house. So it's basically cutting out developers from the process, and so we help landowners divide their land into individual plots, and then those plots get sold to individual self-builders who can then build the houses according to a design code. So the other thing is we've got in the planning application has a design code rather than fixed designs, and so people just have to build within that. As long as people build within that design code, they don't have to go back to planning even for a minor amendment. And yeah, I think this is, again, we've been working on this for several years, and it's been, it takes a lot of effort, but I think it's potentially a really exciting, different way of providing our services. Yeah, sustainability is another one that we kind of really kind of struggle with how to engage with. I mean, I think it's interesting. So the tree house that we did was a passive house. It's certified passive house, 3-bedroom tree house, and then the wedding venues kind of built from earth dug up on the site, and also uses the kind of thermal mass of the walls for some of the passive ventilation. But I think, and we've also been exploring various tools. This is one that we particularly like. It's actually, I think it's from the Netherlands, called the material pyramid. That kind of, these are listing all the, so the materials down at the bottom. It might be a bit difficult for people to see, but if you visit the website you can see it. But the materials down at the bottom are all ones which are like right on the bottom row. They're actually carbon negative or positive. Yeah, can't remember which way round. And then as you go down, they get more and more or less and less good from a kind of embodied carbon perspective. The PIR insulation is the one that's just totally stunned us within this. I mean, I think a cubic meter of PIR insulation is a transatlantic flight worth of carbon, which seems kind of unbelievable in its embodied energy. And what I love about this website is you can then click into each material and it shows you a detailed kind of breakdown of its impact. But I think one of the things we're struggling with is the way that sometimes it feels like this approach to sustainability is becoming almost like an accountancy model. And maybe it kind of relates to some of my skepticism around BIM as well. And we're kind of interested in really looking at sustainability in a bit more of a holistic way. And, you know, there's lots of really interesting discussions around regenerative design and kind of design for disassembly, and seeing kind of and I suppose ecosystem thinking, where you're looking at the whole process and not being kind of led just by an engineering approach. And so while I think a lot of our buildings are kind of highly sustainable, kind of trying to work out how we kind of improve that even further and how we can have the biggest impact we possibly can. And is that working on our own buildings individually, or is it making a tool, or maybe there are enough tools out there already and the tools need cataloguing, or I don't quite know what it is. And so I suppose what I'm doing more than anything is just sort of saying it's how we engage with this is a dilemma that we haven't fully got our heads around as a practice, and I think it's really exciting to kind of talk about as a profession. And then the last one, I suppose, is working as a team, and sort of the culture of an office, which we started as we worked as a design build firm from about 2003 to about 2008, and then since then we've been more working purely as an architecture practice since 2008. And almost every day that I work, I realise that the dynamics of working as a team are more complex and intricate and exciting and terrifying than I kind of thought they were the day before, which is kind of, yeah, both really exciting and terrifying. I suppose this is, I've always quite liked this kind of GIF as a kind of example of how I really don't want to operate as a practice. And there are some really interesting models. This book, Reinventing Organizations, is great about kind of teal ways of working, they call it. So this is more kind of distributed decision making and self-management. Now I love these ideas, and I really excited about the practice evolving to be more like this. But it's sometimes really hard to kind of actually implement that and live the values that you kind of that you might sort of pick out theoretically from a book, but actually making that kind of work on the ground is complex and interesting and exciting, and is something, but by no means we've kind of managed to kind of properly get to grips with, but kind of every day try and improve on. And yeah, and I think that's going to be particularly interesting kind of coming out of lockdown and trying to work out. There's a lot of discussions going on at the moment within the office about how are we going to, which I'm sure is just happening everywhere, about do we work more from home or in the office or a hybrid, and how that all might work. And I suppose that's all kind of really exciting. And yeah, this is our kind of practice up in the attic of St Mary's Mill in Stroud. And talking of a team, we are actually looking to recruit at the moment, which is exciting. But it's interesting coming out of lockdown and seeing the profession as a whole as kind of where that's going to go. And I suppose particularly, I think something that we've talked a lot about is for less experienced staff. If things are a bit more remote and people are in the office a little bit less, how do we help mentor that? And as a profession, ensuring that the younger people who are coming up and learning have the right environment in which to learn, which perhaps more senior people are more comfortable working remotely. But I suppose these are all questions that as a profession we're going to have to kind of deal with over the coming years. And yeah, that's kind of that's me. So I hope that was a bit of a kind of a whistle stop tour through everything, but I hope some of it resonates, and I'd be really up for kind of any amount discussion about some of these things and anything else you might want to talk about. So thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. A lot of food for thought. So yeah, it would be really interesting. I mean, it's now 1 o'clock, but we are happy to stay on the line for a bit longer if you are. As Thomas said, I think he'd be really interested in hearing from you viewers. If anything has struck a chord, or if you can relate to any of the challenges, or as well as tips and tools Thomas was talking about, it'd be really interesting to hear from you. Suppose, I mean, there's a range, isn't there, from the really big picture, how to make your values work in your practice, down to, how you're offering your services. I don't know if anyone else is also using different service levels and what their experience has been, or how you're, I would say, onboard a unexperienced domestic client, communicating with them successfully, or maybe how you think about your approach to sustainable design. If anyone would like to make any comments in the chat, or
I think there's an interesting comment from Kerry that I've noticed in the chat about has the material pyramid altered the way you specify at all? And actually, there is an example of that, which I feel a bit ashamed to say, actually, but which we've just the beginning of this year, 2 of us in the office have been insulating our lofts, and I went first, and it was before I saw the pyramid, and I actually decided to go in for PIR in the end because we had such little space in the loft. I felt it was better to have a higher insulating value, even though I knew the PIR was kind of less good in terms of embodied energy. We then looked at the material pyramid, and I got a better idea of the scale of that difference between the alternatives, and we actually did a comparison with if we'd used the same thickness of wood fibre insulation, what difference would that have made, the kind of payoff between the embodied carbon versus what it would save over its building's lifetime. And we worked out, it was a back of an envelope kind of calculation, but we worked out it would have taken 100 years to pay off the additional benefit that the PIR, having the better insulation value from a PIR. So it's interesting because I mean, I'm slightly contradicting myself because I was saying I don't like the idea so much of the accountancy kind of model for carbon, and yet there's an example where you really need to know the figures in order, you can't just rely on your intuition. Yeah. I hope that helps answer.
Another comment also from Andrew, whether you have issues convincing clients to be sustainable above and beyond the minimum requirements, building regs requirements.
Yes, I mean, I mean, it's shocking really that we have these minimum requirements when, for cars, or, when people did. I mean, especially within housing, say with a car, the people who have the most money are buying the newest cars, and the newest cars are the most sustainable. And if you want a less sustainable car, you can kind of buy an old banger, like if you've got less money. And so it is shocking that probably, certainly with a lot of developer-led kind of, Barratt homes and things, some of the least sustainable buildings are probably the kind of ones that are just meeting building regs, and yet they're the new buildings that we're creating. And Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I'm not sure if that answers it. But.
Sure. We have also a comment on actually the client piece on new clients, how or whether you found it really helpful working with clients who've never worked with an architect before to have, you know, used this really detailed breakdown of your fees.
Yeah, I mean, the detailed breakdown I think really helps. I mean, what the classic response we get is, wow, you slightly overwhelmed us with your fee proposal and it's really complicated. And our response, but people do come back to us and say that, and our response to it is to say, well, you know, this is a complicated process and these are all the things that someone has to do. And so we think it's good that we start to acknowledge how much stuff there is and really put down who's going to be doing what right at the beginning of the process, whereas maybe the architectural technician that you're going to and you've got an alternative quote for, they might not be providing all of this stuff. And so in a sense, we think the detail's helpful in helping distinguish the services, because I think we're just finding that we were supplying way over what people were expecting us to be supplying, and yet we were competing against architectural technicians who were essentially just doing a drawing and saying, yeah, there we go, we're done. And so it's been massively helpful for that.
And it's really a bit of a manual, isn't it, to what you do for those who just really don't have that full picture and insight.
Yeah, I mean, we've started doing, there's still difficulties with the understanding of what we do. And we have started doing a technical manual, which we start delivering right at the beginning of stage 01, where we're just getting all the technical advice out there. Again, people come back to us saying, you know, this is 20 pages. It's really complicated. And again, we say this is complicated, and like there's a lot of money at stake here, and it's important that you make the right decisions at the right times. And I think, and what's great about that technical report is we're finding we're making sure it's picking up on all of the professional requirements that we need to do in a kind of one document, in a way that we find really helpful.
Absolutely, work in progress. We had a comment earlier from David also again about sustainability, and I think he was is a bit skeptical of the sealed box, I suppose, passive house approach to minimizing operational energy. I suppose passive house designers would argue that you are still allowed to open the window and you're not completely sealed in. But what are your thoughts on this, Thomas?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a good friend who lived in a passive house, and then I've obviously visited the tree house many times. And whenever I've been there, the doors are open and fresh air's coming in, and it's wonderful. And the times I've gone in the winter, because the air's being replaced the whole time, it's actually fresher air than I have in my house. That's I've currently bought a 60s bungalow, so it's got kind of PVC double glazing, and everything's almost sealed anyway there. It's just you don't have the mechanical heat recovery. So I've never quite got, I can see where it comes from, but I've never quite followed that argument about it feeling stuffy, because I think that my experience of it has always been fresher than a normal building. But
that's really interesting. That's really interesting. Actually, sorry, just a small one. I don't know if other people experience the same. Apparently, the link to your Google form.
Okay, I tell you, if you save the link after the talk, I'll just check that the permissions are correct on it. So 5 minutes after this ends, you should be able to go in, and if there's something.
Okay, fantastic. That's great. What was actually one of the, I mean, when you mentioned the Reinventing Organizations book, and obviously the challenges of implementing that in the principles in your practice. I mean, are there any particular, what were some of the steps maybe that you took or that you are taking that you've taken from that book, and how successful has that been so far?
So I think I've said it before, but I got quite into business self-help a few years ago, which is a bit of an embarrassing secret. And I've another book that I've got really into is about something called OKRs, which a lot of the tech companies use, which is objectives and key results. I read a book about that over Christmas, and actually in January we came back and said, well, why don't we try and implement this system of OKRs, which basically involves breaking the practice down into some teams, those teams having an objective, so like to improve our sustainability, or another one was to investigate working with customers rather than clients, and then those teams set their own key results, and those key results get reviewed quarterly. Sounds, it's a very cold process in a way, but actually what's grown out of that is those teams now have a lot more autonomy, and where I've had a kind of a challenge, I suppose, is as a kind of leader of a practice, you almost have to get something going, you have to put your own energy and your own thought and your own opinion into things. But as the practice grows, you just become an autocrat, I suppose, if you carry on with that kind of focused energy. And so you have to find a way of distributing that decision making, which isn't always easy. Like, say the whole idea about BIM, that's a personal view of mine, and there are others in the practice who have a different view of it. And so to what extent, as the kind of founder of Millar+Howard Workshop, do I say, no, we're not doing BIM, we're doing VR and Unreal Engine, and that's what we're doing? And to what extent do I have to take more of a back seat and actually say this is more than just me, and there needs to be room for these other opinions? And getting that balance right is a challenge, I think.
It depends probably on what it is about as well, isn't it? I mean, BIM really is a decision for the whole practice. Either you shift everyone and align your working, or you don't. And I think I would say it's probably also fair that there are certain decisions that maybe need taking top down with consulting team members or exploring together the pros and cons, but in the end that maybe someone has to take a decision for all. These may still be fair for some on some issues.
I mean, the other thing that was actually in the Guerrilla Tactics last year was the idea of moving to an employee-owned structure, which is something that we've explored at various points, and I think I hope to explore again in the future, of a kind of a way of kind of sharing the risk and reward of running a practice. But again, it's kind of setting that all up is complex potentially.
It is. I think we'll wrap up 1:15, so maybe one last question from Andrew, whether you've experienced contractors talking clients back from sustainability, I suppose, watering down the sustainability objectives.
Yeah, I mean, we have had that. I mean, one of the things that this really frustrates me actually, and I have spoken to other architects who find this. There is this sustainability, but actually almost even bigger than that is contractors. We find there's this really vulnerable point between getting planning and then going forwards to kind of delivering the building, doing the detailed design and being on site, where in a sense you've got planning, it's normally been a bit of a kind of complex process and the decision was in the balance, and then you eventually get the permission. And then what you're saying as an architect is, right, we need all of these consultants to be on board, and you need to pay us kind of all this money to design your building in intricate detail, and you need to reach this sustainability standard, and you're kind of starting to load the project with a whole load of process. And in the meantime, a contractor comes along saying, no, you don't want to do it like that, mate. Like, I can do it for half the price. You don't need an architect, you don't need a QS, you don't need a M&E consultant, and they're kind of filled with optimism. They don't have any professional duty, and we find that narrative really difficult to counter, because the counter to it is a pessimistic narrative of risk and it's cost more than you think it is, and it's one of those things that we haven't really found a way of dealing with. Well, I mean, one of our thoughts is to try and say that this is going to happen. Like say it happens on every project. You're going to have a builder come in once it gets planning, and they're going to be optimistic, but they can be because they're not committing to anything. And
that sounds like a good approach, actually. So it's also this human optimism bias, isn't it, that you then have to struggle against?
It's tricky. I mean, I think that's where, if you could work out a way of offering a building as a product, it's much easier, because it's just like, here's the building, it's this price, do you want it? And there's not all of that kind of risk aversion, kind of the risk is all built into the offering rather than it being delivered as kind of advice. And
thank you so much, Thomas. Really rich presentation and inspiring thoughts, so thank you. I just want to flag up our next talk on 7th July. We'll have Mimi Atanayake of Nimtim Architects. So it'd be wonderful if you'd like to join us. You'll find obviously the registration link again on our Eventbrite page. And hope to see you in a few weeks. And I'm sure Thomas is always happy to engage in this kind of discussion, and his practice Millar+Howard workshop, you'll find him online if you want to reach out. So
thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Thomas.